Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Unfound Now, this monthly series that I've been doing since the summer of 2020. On today's episode, I'm going to be covering the disappearance of Elizabeth Capaldi from Sellersville, Pennsylvania on October 10th, 2022. She was a 55-year-old white female, and I'll be getting into the details when we go to the map part of this video. If you are new to Unfound Now, if you've never watched this before, maybe you've come across Unfound's podcast channel here on YouTube for the first time. The reason I started doing these episodes way back in 2020 is because I wanted the opportunity to talk about newer disappearances. On the podcast that comes out every Friday, we have a rule, or I guess I have a rule, that a disappearance has to be a year old before we will cover it on the podcast. There's several reasons for that. So eventually, once 2020 rolled around, I thought, I'd really like to analyze some of these newer disappearances. I think that I can learn a lot from doing that, and I think I can pass along a lot of that to you, the audience. And I've tried to do that since that time, going on about 2.5 years now. I maybe think we're about almost to episode 30 of this series. So the reasons I do this, once again, number one, publicity. Every disappearance out there, no matter if it's just a couple months old or 40 years old, certainly can use some publicity. Number two, education. I'm all about education here at Unfound. Many of you know who follow the podcast, maybe watch the live show, know that I've been to schools over the past year talking to criminal justice majors about disappearances, trying to teach them kind of the basics. So this series is also about education, using these newer disappearances as a way to kind of teach you the fundamentals. And then number three, the reason this series exists is to give you an idea of what goes through my mind when I read about a disappearance for the first time. When I see it on a website or on a blog or on Facebook for the first time, watching these videos, you can kind of get inside of my head to see what Ed is thinking at the very moment that he finds out about a disappearance for the first time. So that's what we'll be doing. I will be doing in this video for the disappearance of Elizabeth Capaldi. Now, with every one of these episodes, I bring kind of three lessons that I want everybody to take away from the video once the video is done. And I think they tend to be different every time, but I think I've gone over, here and there, I've gone over some of the same themes depending on the disappearance that I've covered. But the three lessons for this video that I will talk about later after the map section is, number one, telltale signs. Number two, the lesson is, America, we have a problem. And number three, rare, and I don't mean steak. And what's going to be interesting about this, maybe unique about this particular video, is each one of those lessons is going to concentrate on a different theory, possible theory, regarding Elizabeth's disappearance. So I'm going to go to the map section now. I'm going to pull that up, show you where Elizabeth was at the time. I'm going to take a look at the surrounding area. I'm going to read at least one article that has been written about her disappearance, offer some comments, and then I will come back and we will go through those three lessons in a lot of depth. Be back here in a moment. Okay, everyone. I'm going to read an article. Well, you can take a look at the map right there. Maybe I'll zoom this out for you so you can take a look at the surrounding area as well. But that 254 High Street, Sellersville, PA, is where Elizabeth and her husband lived. So allow me to read this, and then we'll maybe do a street view and take a look at the surrounding area. Law enforcement officials in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, are asking for the public's assistance in locating a missing 55-year-old woman. On Wednesday, Bucks County DA Matthew Weintraub held a news conference to bring the case to the forefront. Elizabeth Capaldi has been missing for more than 2 weeks, and this is back in October. Officials say she vanished back on October 10th from her Sellersville home near the quiet intersection of High and East Church Streets. As you would imagine, it left neighbors there quite stunned. Everyone in the neighborhood, we've all been talking about it through text and things, and everyone is a little freaked out. We want this solved as quickly as possible, said neighbor Marcus Bradham. The DA says what can be shared about the investigation is limited, but he did say it was Capaldi's husband who last saw her. However, it wasn't until 2 days later that her adult daughter reported the 55-year-old missing after losing touch. The DA says nothing is off the table. It's just been my experience that people don't go missing unless they intend to go missing. There was a horrific accident or there was some terrible foul play, said Weintraub. He adds Capaldi's car keys, and cell phone were left at home. As I will talk about after this video, after this part of the video, when things are left behind like this, that's usually a very bad sign. But she may not have been completely empty-handed. It was determined that a few of her personal belongings, including her wallet, was missing from her Sellersville home, said Weintraub. Weintraub adds, from everything they've gathered, something isn't adding up, hence why they're asking for the public's help. Capaldi has never been known to travel outside of the area by herself. She mainly stayed in or around her house in Sellersville, unless she was running errands or was with other family members, says Weintraub. Anyone with information is asked to contact Bucks County detectives at 215-348-6354 or the Percy Borough Police Department at 215-257-6876. And I just want to read that again. Investigators said a few personal items, including her wallet, were also missing from her home. Most of her belongings, including her cell phone, keys, and car, were left behind. However, I'm going to guess also that most of her clothes were left behind as well. So from these stories, what it says is that the husband was last to see her, but that doesn't necessarily mean he was home at the time that she went missing. In another story, I read that $13,000 in cash, or maybe it's from an account, but $13,000, I'm thinking it's cash, is missing, seemingly. And which, in my opinion, would not point to foul play. I think this would point to her taking off, choosing to leave, or maybe the husband is just making it all up. And there is a story, there's a YouTuber that I found that when dogs were taken to the house, the dogs eventually took police to this local YouTuber's office. And you can find that video where he talks about the dogs showing up and what went on. This is one more reason why I say dogs are not to be trusted. Okay, so let's now take a look at this map. And I want to zoom in and show you this exact location. And what is the first thing that catches my eye once I put the little guy down there and spin this around is that these are what they call duplexes. Let me move that into the center of the screen like that. This is a duplex, and where people live on each side. This is one way to go to this half. That door goes into that half. This is where they lived. And so you might think if there was something of a foul play nature, let's say that the husband did something to Elizabeth, that the people right next door might have heard it. Of course, it would depend if those people were home or that person was home, what time of day or night it was. This is something that certainly has to be factored into this. So this is not like a house that's out in the middle of nowhere where virtually anything could be done. I think this was also rule out the idea if there was foul play by the husband that he could just go into the backyard, dig a hole, and put Elizabeth in it. You may say that's crazy, but I've covered 2 disappearances or 2 murders exactly like that were eventually solved, although it took a little while. So I think looking at that building like there, right there where they lived, rules any sort of idea that she is still on the property. So let's go back to the satellite view, and I will zoom this out again. And looking at this, a couple things strike me. I mean, there are a lot of homes. This is kind of a neighborhood area. How exactly would she walk away without being seen? Maybe she did it at night. That's certainly a possibility. But I have to tell you, I've also had disappearances where people walked off in the middle of the day and nobody saw anything. So we have to keep that in mind, because there are houses around here. If she planned to leave, maybe she had some sort of plan where she could avoid anybody seeing her. The big question is, where would she go? There's not any thick woods. I understand that searches have been done. Maybe we want to take a look at this area like over in here. Seem to be more trees, a little more heavily wooded over here. Maybe down in this area. But what I don't see, which is something I kind of look for immediately these days in disappearances, if we believe that it's possibly a walk-off, is a major river, maybe the Mississippi. We've covered many disappearances that happened right around the Mississippi. We covered a disappearance that happened right along the Delaware River. One with a bridge going over the Rio Grande River in New Mexico. And we've covered a couple disappearances where men disappeared near the Golden Gate Bridge. This little line right here is not much of a river. It's not very wide across. It's hard for me to imagine somebody, if they were had an idea for a suicide, that the person would go down here. I don't know how deep it is. It just doesn't seem like a viable choice, in my opinion. Maybe certainly locals would have a better feel for all of this. I mean, this distance right here, looking down at the legend or the key in the bottom right-hand corner, it's only about 60 feet across, so how deep could it be? So it's just not maybe a stream or a little creek or a small river that I would pick that could wash a body away, whether somebody jumped in or stepped in. Maybe it's still something they'll need to consider, especially they would know the area and that area better than I do. So if she walked off, not a lot of places she could have ended up in the immediate area. Then the question is, well, if she went further than that or farther than that, then how exactly did she do that without being noticed? We have to start looking up at this area. It certainly looks way more wooded up in that area, but then we're getting it a few miles away. And it starts to become less probable and less probable that that is where she ended up. So the surrounding area does not give us a lot. Does not give us a lot of possibilities. In fact, I would say that it gives us very, very few possibilities. And we know these searches have been done. Certainly doesn't take much to miss a body in the woods, and that's happened before. Just, it's not really striking me as my first choice, maybe right at this moment. But it's very still early on in the investigation. Then there's still the question of this $13,000. Did it exist? Is it missing? We just don't know. So that is the map. That's where she was living. That's the surrounding area. And I urge you to make these decisions and do your own analysis of all of this. So now I will go back to me being on the screen, and I will talk about the 3 lessons for this episode of Unfound Now. Okay, and that was the map section. I hope you found it informative. Before I go into those 3 lessons I detailed at the beginning of this video, I want to remind you, please like this video, give it a thumbs up. That helps us with the YouTube algorithms. Please share this video with anybody who you think might enjoy it, find it informative, especially if you know that somebody maybe even living in the area where Elizabeth went missing. That would, of course, especially be helpful. And subscribe to this channel. Maybe you're coming across this channel for the very first time. And even though this channel has existed for about 5 years, that still happens. New people coming to Unfound and to this channel all the time. Just hit the subscribe button right down there in the corner if you could. And consider supporting Unfound by becoming a Patreon member, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, or right here on YouTube. You can see the little join button down there. If you hit that, it'll tell you some special things you get if you become a member of this channel for the low price of 10 cents a day. I know it doesn't seem like much, but that can go a long way in what we do here, and I appreciate it. All right, getting to those 3 lessons, I will start with the first one. It is called Telltale Signs, and this is going to cover a particular theory that is possible regarding Elizabeth's disappearance. If you don't know, I classify disappearances. I put them into different categories because after covering 275 disappearances now, you cannot help but notice patterns. There are just certain types of disappearances that can be put in little slots, most of them, and then there are those ones that are just so rare they go into what I call a class of their own. But Elizabeth's is certainly what I call the man said type, and this is a very, one of the most common types of disappearances that I've covered over the past 6 years. And the qualities, the points that make that give it that title, give Elizabeth's disappearance that title, is what you usually have is you have a husband telling a disappearance story that doesn't quite add up. And I'm going to give you an example from Unfound's own catalog. That would be Vanessa Van Oren, who the man in her life said she left with 2 men in a white truck, couldn't identify the white truck, couldn't identify the men in the truck, and his story didn't quite add up. And in fact, what happened there was this past year when the police started looking into her disappearance a little bit more, this guy ended up committing suicide before talking to police. So that should tell us something. But once again, one of the qualities of the man said type is that the husband or boyfriend living under the same roof as the woman is telling a disappearance story that doesn't quite add up. Is that going on with Elizabeth's disappearance? I'm not so sure, but we have to think about it. Another quality of the man said type is when the man's story keeps changing. First, he left her somewhere, and when he went back, she wasn't there. And then this next time, he says that she was at home. And then the next time after that, he'll say they were out shopping when she disappeared. These are all very common. You, the public, may not realize this. This is all very, very common. A story that comes to my mind is the disappearance of Marion Hurley, a disappearance we covered back, I believe, in 2020, where her husband originally said that she went missing during a camping trip, and then later changed that she went missing from a golf course. They ran a golf course, and I believe it was in Texas, I think. And he said that one day Marion just got into this truck with somebody and rode off, never to be seen again. Kind of like the story with the man in Vanessa Van Oren's life. Same thing, but Marion Hurley's husband changed his story, and unfortunately, he's still walking around a free man. It should be known in that disappearance that shortly before Marion went missing, she had discovered that her husband was cheating on her. Another quality of the man said type of disappearance is the husband has an attitude. with police when they come to ask him questions. And a disappearance that we covered that comes to mind is the disappearance of Rosemary Rapp in Ohio, where when the police had him come down to the station to talk about the disappearance of his wife, they had been married for 40-some years, the guy said to them, guys, don't even bother. I'm way too smart for all of you, is what he said. That is surely a sign, probably, the guy knows more about the disappearance and he just doesn't want to talk about it. Is this a factor in Elizabeth's investigation into her disappearance? Has her husband said these things? It doesn't seem so. But if this disappearance continues on for a while, we should be looking for that. And if anybody who knows Elizabeth well, knows her husband well, if you have run across him saying anything like that, kind of being a little egotistical about the whole thing, that should be a huge tip-off. And then also, the husband tells some outrageous story. And the one that I always bring up, even to criminal justice majors, is the disappearance of Angela Green. She disappeared in 2019. We covered that disappearance in 2020, where her husband said that he had to take her to a mental hospital, a hospital he would not identify. And then when people really started asking about where Angela was, he said, she died in the hospital, even though he's never produced a death certificate, anything like that, not in Kansas, where they lived, or anywhere else. Is that going on in the disappearance of Elizabeth Capaldi? Not anything yet, but the disappearance isn't even 2 months old. So it's something we should be looking for. And if it comes out, I think then we can start looking at her husband as a good suspect. I'm not sure if we're there quite yet. At this point, and by the way, if you see me looking off to my left, I do not do this off the top of my head. I have notes off to the left of me on my other computer. So it's not clear that any of the above exist yet, at least not publicly. But if anybody, friends and family of Elizabeth or law enforcement, you're watching this, these should all be huge tip-offs that the husband is probably responsible, even if he seems to have a pretty solid alibi. These are huge giveaways, huge red flags. In addition, what I would say is that it seems like the daughter was the one who had to alert authorities that her mother was missing, even it seems that the husband and wife lived together. That is certainly something that catches my attention as well. But those are the basics of the man said type of disappearance. So that's number one. Let's move on to point number two. And it's called America, We Have a Problem. That's kind of a play on that line from Apollo 13, Houston, We Have a Problem. And here I want to just talk about what's been going on in the United States over the past 50 years, specifically regarding women. The suicide rate for women has gone up by 50% since 2000. Maybe a situation with Elizabeth's disappearance, we must consider it. I'm sure friends and family will say, well, she would never do that. We just can never say. I don't like to get too much into the heads of missing people because they're not here to talk about what's in their heads. But the suicide rate for women in the United States in the year 2000 was 4 per 100,000. It is now 6 per 100,000. It's gone up 50%. And by the way, the suicide rate for men continues to rise as well. In addition, here in the year 2020, women are 3 times more likely to overdose than in the year 1999. I don't know. There's nothing that I've seen to say that Elizabeth had any sort of drug problem or anything. But these days, people are overdosing even with medication they should have. They have a lot of powerful a lot of different medications out there that are very powerful And if you do not take them as prescribed, who knows what they can do. And you have to understand that overdoses can take place over minutes or hours, and sometimes can affect a person's brain. They really don't even know what they're doing. They could be walking off, and they just are not really conscious of it. So this has to be something that is in our mind regarding Elizabeth's disappearance. Mental health. I read that Elizabeth had a lot of stress going on in her life. And these days, more and more. I mean, a lot of people, a huge, higher percentage of people compared to like when I was born in 1970, many, many more people are on antipsychotic drugs, antidepressants, you name it. It's a lot of stressed out people out there, a lot of people with a lot of mental health afflictions. And for Elizabeth, I had read that she had a lot of stress going on. Her father had died. Her husband's father had died. Her mother was in a home, I think maybe suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia. It's having my mother died 4 years ago, and just those couple weeks that she was in the hospital where she wasn't getting any better, I know how stressed I was. I know how stressed my father was. And, I just can't imagine living with that for like a month or 6 months or something. I just can't imagine that. But that could be what Elizabeth was going through. And we know how stress can just sometimes push people over the edge. And she may have just walked off, which is another common type of disappearance that we have covered on Unfound. The issue, though, I would think that might get in the way of that is something that her husband said about $13,000 missing. This would fly in the face of her walking off due to some stress or suicide or something. Why would somebody do that and walk off with $13,000 in cash? I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. So, and I have written in my notes, I'll just read it. Unfound has not covered a disappearance like that where I thought the woman left voluntarily. You just have to remember that. I've covered many the man said type of disappearances, and I suppose it's possible that some of these women really did walk off and there was no foul play. But I can tell you, sitting here on November 29th recording this, that pretty much for all of them, I think there was foul play. So we have to keep that in mind when we start looking at Elizabeth's disappearance. But it could be because these kinds of disappearances where there is no foul play get solved before Unfound gets to them. So there could be the man said type of disappearances where the man is not responsible and the woman is found before Unfound ever gets to covering that disappearance because it's solved well before that year limit that I have for covering disappearances. That's certainly possible. So that's the second one. America, we have a problem with both men and women, just talking about women here. Suicide issues, overdose issues, mental health issues that we must always consider when we read about disappearances such as Elizabeth's. And then finally, the third is rare, and I don't mean steak, is that we have to understand how rare it would be. I think that due to the media, and media covers crime horribly, in my opinion, it leaves you, the public, with the wrong impressions regarding why crime happens and how it gets solved and all of that. That's my opinion. And being a person in the media who does report on disappearances, we have to understand that to believe that somebody went to her house and went in there, kidnapped her, and took that $13,000, that is a very, very rare occurrence, at least in the United States. Very, very rare. As the FBI says, 80% of crime happens between people who know each other. So I guess it could be maybe somebody other than her husband, somebody else knew that Elizabeth, let's say, was home by herself and knew that the two kept cash somewhere in the house. I guess it's possible. There's no laws of science that could rule that out. It's still, even with between people who know each other, it would still be very, very rare. But it would even be rarer if it was just some stranger who just happened to knock on the door and do this. In addition, I do that kind of every time I cover one of these disappearances for Unfound Now. I go back through all of Unfound's disappearances just trying to see, does this disappearance line up with any of that we've covered? And I did mention some of similar ones earlier in this video, Marion Hurley, etc. But I went through and going through all the facts of all 275 disappearances, Unfound hasn't covered one where the facts line up for a stranger to have committed the crime or committed the disappearance. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but it's just not obvious from the facts that are known about those disappearances. So what I would say to that then is the odds of Elizabeth being abducted by somebody who is a stranger to her, is very, very, very low. Not impossible, but improbable. Now, my observations, just from my experience, right now, too much is unknown to the public at this point to make a really, really solid prediction about what happened to Elizabeth. I've read some articles. I will admit, in sometimes getting prepared for these Unfound Nows, that I go to web sleuths, because sometimes people who know the missing person will go on there, and sometimes, of course, people can lie about that, but I try to be very discerning when reading some of these things, and of course, I don't want to get fooled, just like anybody else doesn't want to get fooled. There's just not a lot of what I would call insider information right now about Elizabeth's disappearance. Anybody who lives in that town or knew her, anybody saying, for example, we aren't even sure if her husband was even home at the time when she went missing. Of course he was there. That greatly, greatly, greatly increases the chances that he had something to do with her disappearance. However, if he was 100 miles away, that greatly reduces it. And generally, I rule out the idea that somebody would hire somebody to do something like this. We know it happens, but it's rare. The public might think otherwise, but I know that those occasions are rare. So, just not enough information to really nail down a really, really solid theory, in my opinion. Of course, like I said, if the husband was home at the time and he's saying, well, I don't know, she just walked out the door, that's highly suspicious. Highly, highly, highly. But if he wasn't home and it's provable, then I just have to believe that Elizabeth just disappeared all on her own, despite the area not really seeming like a place where somebody could just walk off and not be seen. There's not a large river nearby. There aren't, a dense forest nearby. They certainly figure in when you're analyzing a disappearance. But on the other hand, other people have walked off and disappeared, and their remains have been found, and there was no foul play with a lot less. So, and where is that $13,000? I guess she could have taken it. I would think if she took it, then we have to believe she walked off to start a new life with a new name somewhere, I guess. Or the husband is, even if he doesn't have anything to do with the disappearance, maybe he's looking for a little bit of a payoff, too. It's always possible. But if he is, then if he's looking, if he can't prove that they had that cash in a safe or something like that, then I would really, really then, of course, believe that he had something to do with her disappearance. So those are my observations. I just think we just don't have enough facts right at this point. Not quite 2 months from her disappearance. So there you go. That is the Unfound Now episode for the disappearance of Elizabeth Capaldi. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel. like this video, please consider joining. Or maybe you want to join us over there on Patreon to support what we do. And I will talk to you again next month. Have a great month. See ya.